It's my high stakes review for week 8, and we're starting right now. Sean's one of those people that I kind of rely on to put me in my place a little bit when I do dumb things. So this might be one of those weeks. We'll see. I do kind of want to start with Sean's team today, actually, though. Like I said, this is the game changer we go through every week, the 1500 on DraftKings. But I think this is the week where we're going the optimal approach. Made a lot of sense. And the reason I want to start with Sean's team, this is just the giant $250 double up. You get some pretty sharp ownership in here. I want to start with this because this is almost the identical team that I almost rolled out in the 1500. So I think that this was an optimal lineup that a lot of kind of higher stakes guys landed on. Maybe one type of pivot. If you ended up going Jonnu Smith over Brait, you probably had the Seahawks defense in there. But these three running backs, Michael Thomas, Kenny Stills, Deshaun Watson, Mike Williams in there, gets kind of fit. Maybe last guy in, kind of an air yards type play. This was the team. And we'll talk about the pivot that I made. But Sean, how did you land on this team this week? It seemed like this might have been the week where at least the higher stakes guys were extremely aligned.
Yeah, I actually got pretty lucky. I really wanted to play Chase Edmonds, so I avoided that landmine, luckily. But it pretty much came down to when looking at the lineups, I had a few different ideas. Quarterback, I basically ended up between Deshaun Watson and Derek Carr. I picked wrong. I'm very good at picking incorrectly when it comes to 2v2s or 1v1s. Saturday, I cost myself about 30 grand on a wrong 2v2. So I continued that on Sunday as well. But because I was between Watson and Carr, if I played Watson, I was punting tight end, which something Joe and I talked about going into Sunday is he was not going to play Michael Thomas. And I said basically everyone at high stakes was going to have Thomas. So Joe's day was going to ride along with whether Michael Thomas had 25, 30 points, and then Joe would really not have much of a chance. Or if he didn't, Joe would be in a really good position. But so for me, my decisions were basically Watson or Carr. And then I was going to play Chris Carson, and I was going to play Latavius no matter what. And I liked Fournette, and I also liked Edmonds. So my spot was going to be either Fournette or Edmonds there. And then receivers were basically Michael Thomas and then two of Kenny Stills and Mike Williams. Tight end was basically, for me, Brait, Jonnu Smith, or Darren Waller. And then defense was either the Jags, the Raiders, or the Chargers, depending on where I needed to go with salary. But I assume if you scroll up about 6 or 7 points was where the Jonnu and Seahawks lineup ended up. I'm assuming there's like a mini train on that as well.
There's got to be.
But yeah, scroll down a little bit. I think you probably passed it. But so I was between Jonnu and Seattle defense, and there it is. Yep. So there's a small group on that, and that was the alternative 2v2 that I was debating on Sunday morning. And then, as you saw, there was a heavy portion of high-stakes players ended up on the other lineup as well. So that was my final 2v2, but before that, I considered going Derek Carr, Darren Waller, and an upgraded defense, I believe, over what I did. But I ended up where I did, and that was my final 2v2s that I had.
Yeah, I guess so. If you would have moved down to Carr, you would have had enough salary to get up to Waller as long as you downgraded defense a little bit. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I had $100, I would have played Jonnu over Brait on Sunday. But and Joe and I talked about that. I told him I'd rather have Jonnu, but I just didn't have the 100, and they were pretty similar plays. And I think Jonnu and Brait each had I think Brait had 5 or 6 targets, and Jonnu obviously had at least 6 because he caught 6 balls. So I had Jonnu in early only, which helped me there. But it was pretty similar between what I would have expected between the two. So I wasn't, and I thought the Jags defense was quite a bit better than Seattle's. Obviously, it didn't work out, but that was basically my decisions at the end there.
Yeah, want to shout out my boy Pat Bain in the chat. Sorry, 5 gifted subs. So if you just got a gifted sub from Pat, definitely thank him. Appreciate you, man. Big supporter of the channel. As far as the Brait versus Jonnu thing, I think I made it pretty clear that I preferred Jonnu in that, but at the same time, like you said, you're 100 short of making that work. I definitely preferred the defensive route that you went, to be completely honest. So I really liked Jacksonville. I was at the point of my morning where I was either going to play Jacksonville or I was going to play New Orleans for a little bit more expensive. So basically, I thought both were fine. If you were going to play Michael Thomas, of course, it made more sense just to play the Jags D with Fournette. I think that was a popular route. Jags team that just after what we saw from Darnold the week before, and not even so much that, just that we expected them to get a lot of pressure against a poor offensive line. I mean, their price was really solid. So recognize for sure that Jacksonville was going to be kind of the chalk. If you weren't going to go that route, I almost always want to try in this small field GPP. And let's move over to my team quickly because I think that we'll be able to tie this in nicely. So my team, the difference, and I tell you guys all this time, like everyone that watches this throughout the entire year, building what I think is close to optimal first. And that's, I mean, landed on basically the same team as Sean and those guys. I think that's probably the first time we've been like that aligned, almost like to the point of each and every play. So my big decision was if I was to pivot in some way, how would I do that? I love the Saints D, and that was probably where I first went wrong with my week, is that I wanted to play Saints because I thought that I would get them sub 10%, which I did. Against this Arizona offensive line, a team that pressures a ton. Kyler will take sacks. I love the idea of doing that since I was obviously playing Latavius Murray, biggest lock on the slate by far. I didn't want to play Latavius, Saints D, and Michael Thomas together just for some correlation issues there. So that was something that if I didn't end up playing Jacksonville, which I did kind of want to get off the chalk a little bit there, that was at least a roster construction thing that made me kind of at least try some teams without Michael Thomas. So if I didn't play Michael Thomas, that was basically the path to Darren Waller, which anytime you're making pretty big roster moves just to jam in a tight end, probably not great. So I'll start there. My other pivot, basically, so Stills, I thought he was pretty much a lock, especially if I was playing Deshaun Watson. I liked Mike Williams, one of those guys that was popping in. Josh Hermsmeyer's buy low model. He's been there for a couple weeks in a row. Even with Keenan back, I thought there was a chance that Mike Williams would still end up as a pretty decent play. Caught a floor game from him, but he did see some deeper targets, got one called back as well as Darren Waller got a big catch called back as well. Cole Beasley was my big leverage play. So I wanted to I'm almost always trying to do this with at least one spot in this tournament in particular. So Cole Beasley, I love John Brown most of the week just because that's kind of where you beat Philly. But with the win concerns in this game, I thought it was a little bit sneaky to go with Cole Beasley. His price point was at a spot where his target share was still decent, not an upside guy by any means. But in this spot, I thought that there'd be a chance he'd see a few more checkdowns. I guess that didn't completely come to fruition. He did get in the end zone pretty early in this game, so I felt pretty smart for a little bit. So sub 1% on a guy that I think the game environment skewed towards him being a little bit more involved. I still think there's going to be a game this year where Cole Beasley catches like 10 balls. Maybe shouldn't have chased that a little bit, but I thought it was a good spot with kind of a lot of people in that range. I think that people were just content to pay up at one of their spots and pay down for Kenny Stills, Mike Williams, like we talked about. So my big roster decision was paying up for Darren Waller when I thought that a lot of these kind of cheaper tight ends, guys like Jonnu, I think was my favorite of the bunch, but there was all this Brait talk. There was even talk of like paying down for some of the other tight ends out there. Josh Hill was the other one that I was trying to put my finger on. I didn't really want to go there. So I figured if all these people were kind of messing around in this lower tight end tier, that going to someone like Darren Waller would make a lot of sense. Like far and away the highest projected guy at the position this past week. Probably a little bit of bias there just of the couple of weeks I think that I faded Darren Waller. Those have been the weeks where he's gone nuts. The week that he was playing against Minnesota, obviously the week where I played Mark Andrews with a very similar projection. I know Sean was with me on that one. That one was not fun. So going to Darren Waller at a position I thought was extremely thin for the week. And then if it ends up just being Latavius, would catch a little bit of leverage there. For some reason, Michael Thomas doesn't get in the end zone, or maybe he only ends up with a line of like 7 catches, 85 yards, something like that. I'm leveraging a ton of the field with that. So I guess, Sean, what do you think I did wrong as far as like my thought process through all of that? Cole Beasley, I try not to roster these floor plays. Like I've really done a lot better with that this year, but Cole Beasley I thought was a decent leverage spot given the wind there. But I guess paying up for Waller, paying up for quarterback, like all of those things. Like I probably didn't try enough teams with cheaper quarterbacks. The guy that I liked on the cheap end was Ryan Tannehill, just a little bit of running kind of equity you get from him as well. But probably having the Saints defense get me away from playing at least trying more Michael Thomas teams was the biggest mistake. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think the one mistake you made for the most part was the locking in on the Saints defense and refusal to move off of them. You ran pretty bad for the most part with your guys. We were talking yesterday. I sent Joe a message at some point around 4 or so. What do you guys in the chat think the odds were that Chris Carson and Leonard Fournette would both miss their bonus? Because
Insane.
pretty sure Carson had like 90 at half and Fournette had 70 after one play. So it was a situation where both of them missing their bonus was kind of comical. But Stills played virtually every snap. A lot of them in the slot just didn't run good. They were basically just targeting Hopkins. Mike Williams dropped a bomb. He could have caught another touchdown. His big long catch that he had was unlucky that he didn't score on. He could have kept his mouth, I thought. And then Darren Waller ran really bad. He had at least a 30-yard ball called back and didn't really have as good of a game as he's been having. And then the Saints give up only 9 points and Arizona trails the whole time, and you basically get nothing out of that. So the main issue with the way that things went this week were your stance going into the week was Michael Thomas wasn't going to have a big game. And the problem with the thought process isn't necessarily that it was wrong or right this week. It was that you don't really have a way to catch up. If Michael Thomas has 30 to 35, you're not going to catch him because Darren Waller and Cole Beasley aren't matching 30 to 35. Like if Michael Thomas has 10 for 100 and a touchdown, which he did, and he ran good to get the touchdown, you're just not going to catch him very much. That said, if Michael Thomas has 10 to 15 points, you're in a really good position. So the problem is when sometimes you take a stance against a really, really, really strong play, you're going to get burned by it. But another issue is when you just don't have the ability to make up the ground. Like Cole Beasley's not going to go out there and put up 35 points more than likely. That's just not who he is. But the real issue, I think, for you this week was just locking in on the Saints and not really being flexible to move off them really prevented you from getting up to Michael Thomas. And the reason is because you were not also getting off of Deshaun. So if you're not getting off of Deshaun and you weren't getting off of the Saints defense, there was realistically no chance that you were going to get all the way up to Michael Thomas. So it made it really difficult based on the thought process. And honestly, quarterback is very difficult in the NFL. Watson was a great play. I played him in cash. But the problem is quarterbacks generally have a very similar range of outcomes because they just don't have the ability to explode. So if you have a quarterback, for example, this week, as soon as Derek Carr had 25 points, which he had right around the beginning of the third quarter, there was no way that Deshaun Watson could get near him. And 25 points for Derek Carr is a totally reasonable outcome going into the game. So the problem is with quarterbacks in general in the NFL, if a cheap guy has 20, 25 points, no expensive quarterback's going to come near him because they just don't run enough to put up a 45-point game that frequently. And even if he goes out and puts up 35 to 40 points and someone like Derek Carr has 25, the gap just isn't going to be there where a gap in a different position might be 30, 35 points.
Yeah, man, there's a bunch of things I think that didn't go right. So I was at a point where I probably was completely done anyway as far as late swaps, but Carr came in way lower owned than I thought he would, to be completely honest. So he was 3% in the Millie Maker. I thought he'd be much closer to 10, so I didn't even know of how much leverage I really got there. I wasn't trying to play Baker against the Patriots. I'm talking about my late swap options. So I wasn't trying to play Baker against New England. Wasn't trying to play Kyle Allen against San Francisco. I'm not playing Jimmy Garoppolo because they don't pass. I mean, there wasn't a ton of leverage to move off of Deshaun at that point. In retrospect, sure. At that point, I just got to make a move and just go with Carr. Maybe I go with someone like Tyrell Williams, who came in a lot lower owned and leverage off of the Waller people. And then at that point, I have so much salary, I probably just end up playing someone like Christian McCaffrey or eating a bunch of salary with someone like Nick Chubb. I still don't know if I had a path after the morning. Like you said, like I think the difference in this slate, and there wasn't really a player on the slate with kind of just McCaffrey in the spot he was in. With Saquon, obviously, he still had some wrinkles as well that I didn't like about his usage. That there wasn't a guy really you could argue on the slate that could have matched the ceiling of Michael Thomas in the spot against Arizona with Drew Brees back, all of that. So my spot to leverage typically in these situations is to get off the really chalky wide receiver play. Kenny Stills, like you guys all have been following along, where I think I played Will Fuller 3 of the first 4 weeks of the season. Didn't play him in his blow-up week because he was so chalky. But for some reason, I had that in the back of my head this entire week and was like, I got to jam in Kenny Stills. So at that point, I was like, I'm playing Stills. I'm playing Deshaun Watson. I should have tried some of these other teams. I honestly don't think I ever make it to a guy like Matt Schaub. Obviously, he was the key outside of Carr. I don't know, man. Typically, though, like paying down a quarterback and that is something that I'm not scared to do. I think Deshaun Watson, like paying up for this type of upside is it's never great, man. The guy gets 279 yards through the air, and he was extremely expensive. I mean, he did have 46 rushing yards, which is great. All of those things are great. Carson doesn't even have a catch in this game. That's super tilting. I think I've gotten the floor game each time I played him. Leonard Fournette ends up at the goal line, gets like two cracks at it, doesn't get in, and then
he scored.
Well, yeah, he was probably
play dead like that all season.
Yeah. And then he throws his helmet, coach benches him the rest of the game, doesn't hit the bonus. So, like, that kind of stuff is tilting. They were super heavily owned. But, dude, the first thing I said to you, too, was, man, Leonard Fournette is 20% in the 1,500. That is great. I thought that he would be, like, 45-ish. Like, his usage is completely insane. He's just not near, like, the talent as someone like Christian McCaffrey. And obviously, he's just a guy that he's not going to have the touchdown upside, of course. Like, we've seen that all year. Guys and scored a touchdown all year. I think I'm fine at running back. All of these plays I would do probably 100 times out of 100. Christian McCaffrey this past week, sure, he's always in play. It's really hard to pull the trigger on that. When I was trying to get up to a guy like Darren Waller, again, I think paying up a tight end was my biggest kind of that being my priority along with the Saints defense. That's where you go wrong in roster construction. So, like, man, room for error was thin this week for sure. But I think we did a good job piecing through that. What do you think of Cole Beasley at sub 1% as kind of a place to grab some leverage with that wind?
I like Beasley. I told you when we were making the play, when we were talking on Saturday, that Cole Beasley I thought made a lot of sense. There was a good possibility that if the game played right, Cole Beasley could have seen like 8 targets for 80 yards or 8 catches, 80 yards and a touchdown. So I thought Cole Beasley was a pretty good play, and you have him at literally 1%. So I think Cole Beasley made a decent amount of sense. And yeah, I mean, you even look, the problem with the NFL right now is there's no late game. So you had everyone locked in your lineup except for Deshaun, Stills, and Waller.
Yep.
So realistically, your options going into that game, there's literally not another tight end at that. Well, I guess you could have played Kittle. You could have swapped Waller off to Kittle, which I'm sure Kittle was lower owned. But like, you don't really have much else that you could have done. You would have had to go Brady Edelman or something like that, I guess, because you said there, and the weather was bad there. So there's just so many limited options, and you only have so many roster spots. But the issue, and this is where we come into with quarterback, right? Watson had a good game. Like, he does not have a bad statistical game here. And let's even just give him 300 and a touch and just give him 300 yards. So basically, he gets 31 points. That's a really good game. The problem is it doesn't gap anything at other quarterbacks. Like, pretty much any other quarterback you consider this week puts up 20.
Yeah.
So if you're playing a guy like Watson and a guy like Tannehill puts up 25, I don't know what Tannehill had. You play Carr and Carr gets 25. Again, I don't know what he finished at.
Yeah, close to it.
You just don't get any gap with a guy like Deshaun Watson. Whereas, like, let's say you play a guy like Cole Beasley and he puts up his 13, which again, I think we'll both agree, he didn't get the targets, but him getting into the end zone. Cole Beasley probably at 13 points is above 50 percentile outcome, you think?
Sure. Yeah.
So Beasley puts up 13, which is a decent game for him. Michael Thomas put up, I would say, like a 25th percentile game. He could have easily went nuts in that game. But like, so he had a decent game. Beasley had a slightly above what you'd expect game. The gap's like 20 points.
Right.
Whereas the gap at quarterback, Watson had a good game. These other guys had good games. The gap's like 5, maybe. And that's not, and it probably wasn't even 5. I know Carr got even closer. So that's the whole issue with quarterback in the NFL. The other flip side of that is if your quarterback is a dud, you're just going to get tanked probably because no one else is going to have a dud there.
Yeah, I think too. So the Beasley thing, I was trying to move off of what I thought would be some super chalky Tennessee wide receivers. I heard Sutton in the chat was upset with Corey Davis. Like, these guys were all fine, especially against Tampa Bay, just massive pass funnel. I just thought they would draw some ownership. Dede Westbrook was a guy I definitely considered. Couldn't quite get there with this build, but he was going to draw some ownership as well. Of course, he got hurt, but he was popping in a lot of projection models as being one of the top wide receiver plays in that range as well. So I wanted to get away from all of those guys and play one guy that was going to be lower owned, I thought. So that was the process with that. Quarterback, like Sean said, I think he's kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, maybe quarterback just doesn't matter, man. And I need to kind of get that into my thought process a little bit more. And
Fournette's ownership is, like you said, guys that I love to play. These are guys that I think are fantastic plays and guys I always want to line up. Leonard Fournette ran absolutely awful and got 21 points. That's someone I want in my lineup every week. And the fact that he's 20% at not a very unreasonable salary is just a really, really good play every week. And it's why you've been playing Leonard Fournette all season. It's why you're going to continue to play him. But these are the types of guys you want. Anytime you see guys like this, that's like, man, this guy, like Mike Williams, ran really, really bad in this game. He put up 10 for 40, for 45, or for 4,000. These are the types of guys that it's like, man, that was a really, really good play. I just didn't quite get there with him. But like, if you have a guy like Fournette in this game, I would say ran it like below 20th percentile outcome, 25th percentile outcome, and he gets 20.
Right.
This is just a guy that you just plug and play almost all the time because he just pops in numbers. Fournette should have easily hit the bonus. He actually scored. The ref blew it dead, which they never do. All of a sudden, Leonard Fournette's at 35, which was a super, super simple outcome that should have happened. So these are just guys you want to play, and you play them. If they don't get there, you're just like, well, that's just unlucky on my end.
Yeah, and in terms of kind of circling back to some of those Tennessee guys, like I know someone's upset with his outcome for his points, but I mean, guy was top 8 in air yards for the week. Like he still was seeing nice target share there, some deeper targets. Like I definitely think that some of these other guys in this range, like Cooper Kupp goes absolutely nuts. Mm-hmm. Like he still is only in the top 10 for air yards on the week. Someone like Mike Williams still there getting decent target share. So like these guys are super valuable from a fantasy perspective. Like Kenny Golladay leads the way this week with all of those air yards, but he was a guy we talked about. Mike Evans was a prime regression candidate as well. Like both of those guys were guys we talked about on the Sunday stream. I guess didn't fall in love with the construction that got me into that price range and still allowed me to get Waller. So this is like one of the things I'm almost always looking at is just what guys we're at least seeing some of these valuable targets. So I want to move up a little bit and talk about some of these other teams in this contest. Someone in the chat asked before, and I did want to circle back to your question, Hess. He was asking about my process on game stacks. He's been doing a lot of 2 pass catchers with QB, running it back with someone on the other team. It is kind of contest specific for me. So I honestly think anything over like 250 people, 500 people, like I think it's a game stack scenario. I'm not really attacking this tournament like this. And one thing that I do think that is a little bit different, I don't think Sean agrees with me on this. I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday. This contest used to be 60 people. Now it's 110. I actually think even that is a pretty big difference on how you should be constructing your teams, like small field versus a very small field. But I guess what's your process? Like, are you kind of with me? Like, you're game stacking anything over, I don't know, 300 people or so? I think it's based on field size for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in order to win something, a lot of the time you're going to need some sort of game stack. But like again, this week was kind of weird, right? Like if you stacked Tampa Bay and you double stacked them, no one else really went off except for Evans. I don't think that
Godwin ended up with 10. Yeah, so you're right.
Yeah, and then so you look at Detroit. Golladay went nuts. Marvin Jones Jr. was terrible. Unless you're going to double stack him with Amendola, which you're not going to do, or Marvin Hall, which you're not going to do. It just wasn't going to happen. And then you look at, there was another spot where someone went off, one receiver went off, and the other, you look at, you try to double stack Houston. Kenny Stills was a dud, but Hopkins had a really strong game, but he didn't score. So it's a situation where I think in a field size like this, it's still fine. And we look at it, we're 8 weeks in, and you almost won the tournament twice in 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's proven that you're still fine to not game stack. But I mean, a lot of the time, if there's a situation where a game goes absolutely nuclear, there's probably going to be a game stack that wins it. This weekend wasn't that. There wasn't really a nuclear game that went off. You just had to have the right pieces. As you see, like this team in second was sort of all over the place. They double stacked Tennessee, but Corey Davis was a total dud. If he plays someone else, he gets an even better situation. And double stacking with a tight end is even better because Jonnu Smith basically costs $2,800. If Jonnu Smith catches 3 for 30, you're not terrible shape with it. So it's one of those situations.
It was a different kind of week too because a lot of these wide receivers got there, right? So Kenny Golladay at 32, like in that price range, I was kind of paying for guys like Chris Carson and guys like that. So I think that if you ended up kind of avoiding the big landmines of the week and maybe you backed into something like Mike Evans, you had an awesome week. But it was probably as simple as just doing what you did, to be completely honest. Like this lineup was totally good for cash, I'm assuming. Did this cash some of the smaller GPPs as well? It had to have been pretty close.
I think it was right around the 20th percentile, 25th percentile. But like the 2v2 I had was like a top 10 percentile lineup. So like, I mean, you can look, I think the lineup I had what, how much did mine have?
169.
Yeah, mine had 169. I think the other one was like 178. So
Yeah.
like, let's see if 178 would have cashed this. And that lineup had all of those, so it would have been like right along the bubble of
Let's
this.
see. 22 paid, 174 cashes this. So right at the
Yeah.
bottom. Yeah.
And so that lineup also had Carson running terrible, Mike Williams running terrible, Fournette running terrible. It had all these guys that easily could have had an extra 5 to 10 points. All of a sudden, that lineup's at 200. You're right up near the top.
Nice. We had someone in the chat say they got 6th place in the big $12 single entry. Nice job, Flash. That was a sharp take you had on Davis earlier too. I actually didn't even realize he was that high up in the air yard. So you're looking at the right stuff, man. Congrats on the good week. I know we had a couple other people. Hardcore Dorn had a little bit of a sweat as well. Shout out with him. He scored 166 with Sony and a 0 from Kiki. So yeah, the Kiki thing. He was a guy that if I was going to pivot away from Stills, like it probably just would have been either Kiki or, like I mentioned before, Tyrell Williams in that same game. But Kiki ends up getting benched in this spot. I definitely didn't see that coming. DeAndre Carter, I believe, took his spot in those snaps, which is pretty crazy. So don't feel too bad about the Kiki play, man. I think that in a high total, getting something like that would have made some sense. So let's walk through a couple other teams. We spent a lot of time on mine today, but I almost like to spend more time on it when I don't cash a tournament. I think there's more value in that. See if was Empire Maker in it this week, Sean?
I think he was actually out of town. I think he was in like a state that you couldn't play, so I don't think he played.
Cool.
But yeah, and one more person to talk about that we haven't talked about because neither of us played him was Ty Johnson. Yeah. I thought going into the day, Ty Johnson was a really bad play and was a very trappy play. He was okay on FanDuel, but so the issue is going into the day, it looked like McKissick was going to get pass downs. Carson's there to vulture. They said they were going to play Paul Perkins possibly too. And then when the lineups came out, they did not scratch any running backs, which is also why I like Chase Edmonds. They ended up scratching everyone except for my boy Zach Zenner in Arizona, which made me like Chase Edmonds quite a bit more. That game was just, they were trash, and then he got hurt. So it really hurt him. But Ty Johnson, I think he was the third running back off the board, was barely playing in that game.
He was 20% owned in the Wildcat, man. He was only 15, or he was 16 in the Millie. He was 17, almost 18 in the Wildcat, which I think is just completely egregious.
And I think he was like 25 in cash. I don't know who played him in the 250 double up, but if you can check that, I think he was probably like 25% owned. In that, which is I going into the week, I was talking to a few people and I'm just like
25% owned in the $250 double up.
Exactly. So like people really, really liked him. I thought he was the trap of the week. Now that said, most of the time that guy goes off for 35 and I'm just sitting there crying in my hand, but luckily didn't work. As you can hear my dog, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but she's enacting what I would have been doing had Ty Johnson had 35.
Yeah, that's that one would hurt for sure. Someone in the chat's mentioning Tevin Coleman. I don't know, man. I don't understand the Tevin Coleman play. They have like 3 running backs that are getting touches there. I get it. They're really, they're very run heavy there, but Breda got hurt in this game too. Like at the point where Tevin Coleman had 3 touchdowns, he had like 11 carries. Like I'm just never going to land on that guy at that price. I think he was 5K. Sure, he looks like a great play. He scored 3 touchdowns, but good luck chasing that all season. I guess don't play guys like that. Chase Edmonds was an interesting one. I thought he was overpriced on DraftKings in particular. I believe you said you ended up on him on FanDuel, right? So I think he was a better play over there probably. He seemed a little bit expensive, but easy to say that when he gets hurt. Like he easily could have gone off in this spot as well. Just tougher matchup against New Orleans. I just thought there were so many good running back plays. I guess wasn't getting off Latavius. Even Latavius, man, like in the game changer, he's 75%. And even in this higher stakes cash game, let's see what he was. I'm sure he was at least that, right? He was probably even higher.
I think he was 80 in that. And the issue with Edmonds is Edmonds wasn't a play because of being a good play. Edmonds was just a very safe volume play, and he's so good at receiving. Like Edmonds in this game, I would say his bottom 10 percentile outcome starts at like 8 to 10 points. Obviously, that didn't happen, but Edmonds was just a really strong volume play that's also really good at pass catching. So I think that was the issue with Edmonds. But yeah, Latavius was so chalk. But even that, like he's 80%, 20% of the field's dead right away. They don't have Latavius.
Did you consider Coleman? Like someone in the chat that played him obviously is defending him, just saying that he gets the goal line carries. Man, he's 5K. I had him projected for 1.7 catches, like 16 touches total. Like, I don't know. There was an injury in this game that leads to more touches. Like, Carolina's pretty good at defending running backs in the passing game. I'll I'll admit that if you care about running back matchups, like they're a team that's pretty that can be beat on the ground for sure. So I don't know. I never would have landed on the Coleman play. He's like, as far as projected touches, he's like the 12th highest, maybe, even if you give him a little bit of a bump there. So I never would have got to that play. Did you consider him?
I literally don't even know what his price was.
He's like the same as like he's the same play as Ty Johnson. I guess Ty Johnson didn't get there, and Tevin Coleman did with 3 touchdowns, in my opinion. Like I don't see how there's any
Yeah,
difference.
the issue is Ty Johnson's ceiling in this game was a workhorse running back.
Well, he catches passes at least, but there was also there's also so many running backs on both of those teams. I just don't understand how either of them were in play.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ty Johnson was okay because of the possibility. Coleman is going to be splitting carries in this situation anyways.
Coleman's out
And the
touch
problem
grade.
is in cash, you can't play a guy like that. In tournaments, you really can't play a guy like that. Guys that don't get volume in terms of cash or GPPs just isn't generally going to pay off. Yeah, you might hit that random game where they have a $150 and 3 touchdowns on.
He had 11. He had 11 carries, man.
Exactly.
I don't know.
So,
Anyways,
and you know me, I like my volume. I want volume.
No, I know, and I think this is a guy that maybe he made more sense for. I don't know. I'm trying to piece my way through it. I'm really trying, man. I'm not trying to rag on your play. Obviously, you got there, so I hope you won some money. I didn't, so I guess you're doing something right. So let's talk about Jeff El Jefe's team. I like to touch on his because he usually has a couple plays that are kind of off the board. His Nick Chubb play at 2% in this tournament was interesting. A guy that's going to get volume against a tough defense. We saw that worked for Christian McCaffrey, but Nick Chubb, who I think is pretty talented as well against this New England defense, like you can project him for touches for sure. So Chubb I actually had projected for the 4th most touches overall on the slate, behind McCaffrey, behind Fournette, behind Carson. So I think that he was kind of an interesting pivot in that range if you maybe didn't want to go the Edmonds route. I think I'm with you, Sean. I think Edmonds was probably the safer play, but Chubb and GBPs, I think that's the way you pivot in a spot like that. So I like that play. TJ Hawkinson at 8%. I thought he was actually pretty sharp as well, with everyone kind of going the Galladay and even kind of the recency bias with Marvin Jones. I mean, the Giants are a team that they never really invest a ton at the positions where they're going to be stopping tight ends in general. So like we've seen it year after year, the Giants are just giving up a ton of usage to tight ends. People forget about Hawkinson. I don't hate that play at low ownership. Tyler Boyd, again, just the volume is there. The ceiling is not. He just feels like the new Jarvis Landry to me. Calvin Ridley at 0.9%. Wow. With Sanu traded. He got some nice ownership on some of these plays for sure. So I don't have a ton of issues with this one outside of I probably wasn't playing Drew Brees. But I think on FanDuel in particular, I think Brees' price was really low. So that would have been interesting. But yeah, if you, I mean, he's still 3 touchdowns, almost 400 yards, 28 points. I got this from Lamar Jackson 2 weeks ago, and he didn't even throw a touchdown. So I still think the rushing equity is super important. But what are your thoughts on this one? Then we'll touch on one more.
Yeah, so the issue with Calvin Ridley, though, is Matt Schaub doesn't throw the ball down the field. He's got a noodle arm for the most part, so it makes it difficult for Ridley to sort of go off. Otherwise, I'm fine with it. Bring it back with Edmonds with the Breeze, Murray, Thomas stack, I think is good. I don't see any issues. I think Chubb, like you said, Chubb's going to get the 4th most volume on the slate, and you're going to get him at 2%. That's a good GPP play because that's someone that has the opportunity to go off. He had a really long run. He got caught from behind and fumbled at like the 5. Otherwise, he has a big game. So I think that was a really good play. And I actually really like the Boyd play. People were hating on Tyler Boyd, but the volume and target share is there. He just wasn't quite producing. So I really like Tyler Boyd this week because everyone sort of got burnt by him the last couple of weeks, and they were getting away from him when he's getting the volume. It just hasn't got the stats that you want out of it.
Yeah, speaking of getting burned, I just want to touch on the team that won this. What about your boy Saquon, Sean? He seemed like he was his price on this slate in particular with some of the other workhorses we had for a lot cheaper. I wasn't really going to play Saquon when it came down to it. He ended up almost 20% in this tournament, which is a little bit higher than I thought. Doesn't hit the bonus, but was super active through the air. Broke that crazy run. They were already down by 2 touchdowns from a real football perspective. I'm not sure how much Saquon helps them win games in particular, but from a fantasy perspective, I still think Saquon always carries a ton of upside. I know he's your boy.
Yeah, he always is going to have that. Last week was sort of a very unlikely situation where he just doesn't do much of anything. This week, he did what you'd expect. He got his volume, got his catches, got you 28 points. That's what you expect out of a guy like that. There's only a few guys in the league that get that. It wasn't a terrible matchup, so it was a situation where 20% is probably fair. I think 20% is a decent, maybe a smidge high. I would have guessed it would have been around like 15. But in GPPs, we talk about it. If you don't want to play Fournette in them, you can't really play a guy that's not going to get volume if you're not going to play Fournette, because Fournette's getting 20. You got to play another guy that's going to get volume. So, like, if you want to sort of hedge off of Fournette and play Barkley, I think that makes a little bit of sense. And you just hope that Barkley beats him by about 5 to 10 points, which is definitely doable.
Yeah, and this lineup in particular, Stafford to Kenny Galladay, bring it back with Saquon. Nice run there. Play the cheap tight end. So yeah, good for him. Big cut. I actually don't even recognize a ton of the names towards the top on this one this week, which take that for what it's worth. Let's touch on the gridiron quickly, Sean. So this is one of the tournaments. Again, it's 5 weeks long. So I had just another performance kind of right in the middle. I think I'm probably dead to win this thing at this point, Sean. With three of the 5 weeks, I've been basically right around the midpoint. Consistency is very important, but there are some teams that have been running super hot in this one. So at this point, I'm probably just running out a GPP team, correct? With 2 weeks
at this
left.
point, you're just trying to cash it each week like a GPP and try to recoup money, because I don't think you can even cash, I would assume. Maybe if you go back-to-back top 5s, you could cash, but even that, I don't think you can cash. So at this point, you're just trying to win 1 week and get, I think, what is it, 10 grand for a win for the week?
10 grand for the win, and then the overall, I think 17 of the 100 cash, and it's like not even a double. It's not even a 2x man cash.
Yeah, so at this point, you're just trying to game stack and try to drill out 1 week where you get your money back out of it. That's really all you can do at this point. You've just put out a few too many duds to really be competitive in it.
Yeah, so we talked about our boy Nevs the past 2 weeks. He got a first place finish. He also had, I believe, a top 6 finish in week 2. But this week, he's finished in 79th. So that's really going to honestly kind of bury him as far as like getting to the top. Like, you have to be consistent in these type of contests. But I want to talk about his lineup just because this was a path in order to get a lot of these running backs we talked about. And if you pay down a quarterback, you could still get Michael Thomas and Darren Waller. Like, this was one of those lineups where if you did want to make that work, fading someone like Fournette wasn't something that I considered, but he still got up to Chase Edmonds. So it sucks when he's had 2 weeks in a row where he's just smashed, and then an injury kind of takes him out of contention quite a bit. But as if you were Nevs and you had 2 nice finishes, I believe he's 18th right now out of the 100. If he really wants to get up top, like, are you still building optimal these last 2 weeks, or is he still going to have to take some shots, you think?
Yeah, he's still building optimal, but this is sort of what we talked about. So he was literally in first place and had the 2 pretty much best performances you could have. Week 3, he puts up a dud and is literally not even cashing anymore. So he's still going to have to go optimal and hope that he can make it back up, but there's no reason to think he can't. If he puts out 2 top 20s the next couple of weeks, he should finish in the top 10 in this pretty easily. But that just goes to show how important the consistency is in this, where you have someone who put up 2 elite performances and then put up 1 dud and is virtually out of cashing just because of that 1 week. But yeah, it sort of stinks. Like you said, Edmonds' floor here really should have been 10-12, even though it was a bad matchup. So even if you give him, let's say, 10 points and you get another 5 or 10 elsewhere, all of a sudden he's in 50th for the week, and it's a much different outcome with where he's at compared to where he finished this week.
But to speak to what you've said about Edmonds' floor a couple times, just to give you a good example, so he was only 10% in the Millionaire Maker, but this 5K entry where, like we said, consistency and floor really matters, 22% in the Gridiron. So I think that was a sharp call by you. Someone else is talking about my Beasley play in the chat. Had nothing really to do with price, had to do with leverage off of these other guys in that price range. So if I wanted to optimally kind of free up salary, I just would have played someone like D.D. Westbrook in that same range. Beasley was a pure, I want to get a guy sub 3%, but still build kind of a unique roster construction team without Thomas. That was the thought process there.
And you won that leverage. You won that leverage on all 3 of the chalk receivers.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I never thought that there was a massive ceiling there by any means, but if he does have that 10 catch game, I was going to get it at 1%. So maybe that was bad. I don't know. We'll kind of look back on the process and kind of work through that. But yeah, the win thing definitely had a big kind of impact on that decision. So anything else you think we should touch on as far as like the slate as a whole? I think we covered quite a bit. It was very condensed this week. I feel like I don't really see a ton of spots where maybe people just went nuts, like Cooper Kupp at that ownership, like against Cincinnati. Maybe that's something we could have been on, but I think at most people were just playing Hopkins or or Thomas at that spot. Did you ever put any thought into Cooper Kupp? He's historically my boy, but I'll let you speak to him.
Yeah, I consider him for a second on FanDuel. It just sort of, he worked, but the weather wasn't great there either. So it was a situation where there was just better options, which is why I didn't go there. But again, Cooper Kupp against a really bad Cincinnati team at 2%. Pretty solid play. He was running wild in that game. He could have put up even more points in that game in different scenarios, but he looked really good in that game with what he was doing. He just finds great zones, and he just finds the soft spot and just plops down and gets his yards. And yesterday, when he got his yards, there was literally no one within 25 yards. Like, if I ran the routes Kupp had yesterday and was in the same situation, I'd probably get 100 yards because he was catching balls without anyone within 20 yards of him, where I could have got some yak.
It's crazy, man. Yeah, I think that interesting week in general. Let's touch on Al's team here, friend of the stream, Al Smizzle. He did play Deshaun Watson as well. Tougher week for Al. He ended up kind of doing something similar to me. He ended up paying up at tight end. We played the same running backs. We played Stills and Watson. So yeah, very similar team as mine. The only difference really is that he ended up playing Sutton instead of Beasley, and then had a different route at defense, of course. So yeah, actually really similar teams for me and him this week, which is interesting. Talk about JM to Win's team. He's usually got some kind of off the wall, off the board plays at least. He had to go with like the full Tannehill stack. Tannehill, AJ Brown, Corey Davis. Looks like he brought it back with Godwin and not Evans, so that's unfortunate there. He jammed in a couple of the high volume running backs, played DeAndre Hopkins in the flex, which honestly, like, these wide receivers did a little bit better than some of the elite running backs on the slate if you didn't end up to Saquon or someone like that. Hunter Henry at 16% was interesting. I thought a lot of people would actually go there, but I think just most people ended up paying down or paying for Waller, one of those two. But let's end on this, Sean. The Patriots defense. Have you played them at all this year, and have you just been getting buried by them like me every week?
I played them 1 week on FanDuel, I think. Actually, I might play them 1 week in general and full, but I mean, for the most part, well, they've been on so many showdown slates where it's like, all right, they're like priced like Christian McCaffrey, can't play the Pats defense. Oh, they have 28 in the first quarter. Okay, I don't have to watch this game anymore.
Slate over, yeah.
I mean, we've talked about it. If the defense is doing this, you're going to lose. Like, it's just what's going to happen. But at the same time, like, these weeks when the Pats defense is 30 or 40% owned, you should have no business being near them in a GPP because that's just awful. But hey, they put up 25 points every week, so
I don't even know what to do with them at this point.
No, I mean they're very frustrating, but especially so in these showdown slates. Like these showdown slates, the last showdown slate, the Pats defense was like 8K, and they were like 45% owned in a showdown slate at like 8K. It was wild.
And even on Classic, it's annoying. So they're almost 18% on the Millionaire Maker. Anything that you're looking at high stakes, they're going to be hovering around 10%. So almost half the ownership at high stakes. So people are just getting buried by these guys. But obviously, if you wanted to go up there and do that, I don't know. You guys go ahead. I doubt that I get there at some point on a main team. I just want to at least talk about one last play. We did talk about Mike Williams a little bit, but if we're just looking over the last 4 weeks, Mike Williams is leading the entire league in air yards. I don't know. I still think that at his price, he was the guy that was worth taking a shot on. Like you see people like Mike Evans in this range, Cortland Sutton, DeAndre Hopkins, these guys that are seeing a really valuable target share for their offense. So interesting spot for sure for Mike Williams. At some point, he's going to get there. Probably be this next week, and maybe at that point, I won't have him. But any final thoughts, Sean? I think that was pretty good for today. I think we covered a lot.
No, I mean, that's the NFL. Ooh, man, is it fun sometimes.
Yeah.
Joe and I talk about every Sunday. If you miss your 1v1 or 2v2 in NFL, man, it's rough. For all those people out there that want more fun, play college football. Way more scoring and way worse ownerships. For example, I got a receiver on Saturday that played quarterback at like 2% because nobody pays attention. So, like, imagine Julian Edelman playing quarterback in a game with like a 70-point total at like 2% owned, because that's what you can get in college football. So come on down to those streets and we'll see you there.
That sounds way more fun, man. Yeah, make sure you guys are following Sean on Twitter. He's at PSU Fans too. Really trying to convince him at some point to jump into the Twitch and YouTube streets. Maybe by the start of college football next year, we'll have a lot more from Sean and some college football stuff, which sounds like a lot of fun. This is one of the ones last couple of weeks been pretty frustrating in NFL, but we'll keep going. We'll keep trying to make good decisions, and I just want to let everyone know we are going to be live again tomorrow. I'll be doing my first look for week 9 already, which seems crazy. So I'll be doing that live on stream, and then those videos will come out on YouTube. So if you're new to the stream, definitely check out the videos over on YouTube, youtube.com/Joe Holka. Bunch of content going up on Instagram as well. Just search my name, you'll find me. And then per usual, we will have the stream on Sunday mornings, 11:30 Eastern time before lock. So make sure you come hang out with us before lock. And there may be a Holkamania kind of post-lock hangout stream again this week, to be determined on that one. But hopefully we can get those rolling again soon. Those have been a lot of fun. If you want to learn more about how to become a profitable daily fantasy sports player and better, start now by hitting the subscribe icon in the bottom right hand corner so you don't miss anything. Be on the lookout for all of my DFS content throughout the week, starting with these courses right here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.